The screaming started at exactly 8:17 in the morning. It cut through the stillness of Willow Park like a blade, raw and jagged, a sound born of panic and pride colliding in public view. People stepped out onto their porches, coffee mugs halfway to their lips, drawn to the spectacle unraveling at the end of the street. Eleanor Maddox stood frozen in her silk robe, her manicured hands clawing at the air as if she could pull her pearl-white Mercedes back down from the steel arms of the tow truck that had already lifted its front wheels clear off the ground. Her perfect world, polished to a blinding shine for years, was tilting forward, screeching, in the grip of cold metal jaws. Every frantic movement betrayed something primal in her. This was no ordinary inconvenience. This was a woman watching her entire kingdom teeter on the edge of collapse, and the shrill edge in her voice told anyone with ears that she knew it. "You cannot do this. This is private property. Do you know who I am?" she cried, her voice cracking like ice under strain. The words bounced off garage doors and stucco facades, carried on the crisp autumn air. Neighbors watched from behind blinds and over hedges, some pretending not to record as their phones glimmered in the morning light. Others made no effort to hide it. After all, this was the Queen of Willow Park, the woman who had ruled their lives with citations and fines, unraveling in real time. And yet, what none of them knew, not Eleanor, not the gawking neighbors, not even the tow operator standing firm with years of unpaid invoices tucked under his arm, was that this moment, this beautiful crack in her porcelain armor, was only the beginning. Because 3 hours earlier, that same woman had smashed a crowbar into my Camaro, splintering the last piece of happiness I had fought to hold on to. While she was reveling in the sound of tearing metal and shattering glass, while she thought she was breaking me, I was setting in motion a chain of events that would break her entire world apart. 3 hours before the screaming, before the spectacle, my morning started with silence so sharp it almost hummed. I remember staring at what used to be my dream car, standing barefoot in the driveway, as if my skin needed to feel the cold concrete to confirm I was awake. The red Camaro sat there like a wounded animal, its glossy skin torn into ragged strips, windows reduced to a glittering mosaic that crunched underfoot like frost. The metallic tang of exposed steel hung in the air, mingling with the smell of motor oil and rage. Every line of damage told a story of hate carved with intention. This was no random act of vandalism. This was surgical, and I knew the hands that had done it. Eleanor Maddox. The name thudded in my head like a drumbeat. The woman who had turned peace into a luxury I could not afford. The self-appointed monarch of manicured lawns and mailbox inspections. The person who had decided, without hesitation or remorse, that my existence in this neighborhood was a violation of her carefully curated kingdom. It is strange how a single act can ignite a storm that had been brewing in the background for months. When I moved to Willow Park 6 months ago, I was just another man trying to piece together what was left of a life blown apart by divorce. 52 years old, stripped down to the essentials, after a court battle that left my ex-wife with the house, the dog, and half of everything I had worked for. I walked away with a retirement account gutted like a fish and a box of clothes that smelled faintly of bleach and defeat. I thought I could start over quietly, bought a modest ranch-style home on the last street of a development where every lawn looked like it had been cloned in a lab. Rows of identical trees, driveways like carbon copies, facades smiling the same polite smile. It was the kind of place where people waved without meaning it, and rules were printed thicker than the Bible. I thought I could handle that. I thought maybe that was what I needed: order, structure, something predictable after years of chaos. I thought wrong. The first thing I did after closing on the house was indulge the one dream I had carried like a flickering flame through the darkest year of my life. I bought the car, a 2024 Camaro SS in rally red. $40,000 of steel, leather, and redemption. Every cent I had left poured into a machine that made me feel alive again. I can still remember that first drive home. Windows down, wind snapping through my hair while the Texas sun turned the asphalt into molten glass. The V8 engine rumbled like distant thunder under my feet, a sound that vibrated straight into my bones, telling me I was still here, still standing, still capable of feeling something that was not grief or anger. For a brief moment, I believed I had beaten back the darkness. For a brief moment, I felt like myself again. That feeling lasted exactly 3 days. On the 4th day, I met her, Eleanor Maddox. Picture someone assembled in a factory that specialized in manufacturing suburban royalty. perfect platinum bob that never shifted in the breeze, tailored blouses paired with trousers that whispered of brands most people only read about in magazines, nails that gleamed like polished ivory. Her Mercedes sat in her driveway like a shrine, reflecting the sun with a glare that seemed intentional. Her house, the largest at the end of our cul-de-sac, did not just sit there, it squatted like a throne, its emerald green lawn manicured with military precision. She carried herself like the air around her was a private asset, and everyone else was trespassing. She smiled when she introduced herself, but it was the kind of smile you give to someone whose name you have already written on a list. I did not know it then, but that smile was the opening move in a war I never asked for. The first strike came tucked in an envelope, a citation for my mailbox. Black apparently violated aesthetic harmony. I replaced it with the approved shade of brown, $89 for a piece of metal that did nothing new. Then came the lawn violations, arriving like clockwork every Tuesday. My grass was 3/4 of an inch too tall. $25 fine. Oil stains on the driveway from my work truck. $50. A garden hose not properly coiled. Another fine. Each slip of paper landed in my mailbox like a small, sharp insult. And every time I looked toward Eleanor's window, I saw her silhouette, a perfect figure framed by curtains, arms crossed, lips curled in a smile that never reached her eyes. The bitterness started then, rising like bile, every time I saw her Mercedes glinting in the sun like a symbol of untouchable power. I told myself to ignore it, that some battles were not worth fighting. But when she turned her sights on my car, when she declared in a board meeting that my Camaro was an inappropriate vehicle for our community image, the last thread of my restraint snapped. I can still smell that room, the stale coffee, the disinfectant that failed to hide decades of mildew. Eleanor sat at the head of a folding table, flanked by her loyal drones, her voice carrying the smooth, practiced authority of someone who had never been told no. "Sports cars project the wrong image," she said, her eyes fixed on me like laser sights. She handed me a citation for $200 and threatened to place a lien on my property if I did not comply. That night, I stayed up until 3 in the morning reading every line of the HOA bylaws, fueled by bitter coffee and pure fury. What I found was worse than I expected. She was enforcing rules that did not even exist. Armed with proof, I walked into the next meeting ready to fight, but Eleanor just leaned back in her chair and smiled that predator's smile. "Perhaps you would be happier in a different neighborhood," she said softly, her words coated in sugar but laced with venom. The message was clear. I was not welcome here. That was when the war began, though neither of us knew how far it would go or how many lives it would change before it ended. Eleanor Maddox was not just a neighbor, she was an institution. The type of person who could bend a neighborhood into submission without ever raising her voice. Her rulebook was thicker than the HOA bylaws, and every page of it was written in invisible ink only she could read. People in Willow Park did not argue with Eleanor. They complied, or they moved. Her power was not in the fines or the citations, though those were weapons she wielded with merciless precision. Her real power was fear, the kind that seeped into your bones when you realized every move you made, every flower you planted, every color you chose for your front door might end up in one of her infamous violation notices. And she had perfected the art of making those notices sting like paper cuts to your pride. They were not just warnings, they were public declarations that you had failed her impossible standards. Her house reflected the empire she believed she ruled. The lawn, so flawless it looked like it had been rolled out from a carpet factory, never had a single blade of grass daring to tilt in the wrong direction. The hedges were sculpted into rigid symmetry, and the flower beds exploded with blooms that seemed to defy the Texas heat. Even her driveway shone like polished marble, and at its center sat her shrine, the pearl-white Mercedes C-Class, gleaming under the sun like a trophy for winning a game only she knew she was playing. People whispered that she had connections with city officials, and based on the way inspectors seemed to appear and disappear at her command, I believed every word. The first time she spoke about my car in public was during the monthly HOA board meeting. The room smelled faintly of stale coffee and disinfectant, a poorly lit space that doubled as a community center for birthday parties and yoga classes. Folding chairs lined up like an army of discomfort, and fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, their hum filling the silence whenever the conversation hit a tense pause. Eleanor sat at the head of the long plastic table, wearing a cream-colored blouse that probably cost more than my entire living room furniture. She adjusted her papers with the precision of a surgeon preparing for an operation, then leveled those icy blue eyes on me like I was an invasive species contaminating her habitat. "We maintain a certain aesthetic standard in Willow Park," she began, her voice smooth but carrying a steel edge. "And sports cars, particularly ones in aggressive colors, project an image that does not align with our community values." The words hung in the air like smoke after a gunshot. I glanced around the room, expecting at least one of the board members to question her logic, but they all nodded in perfect synchronization, bobbleheads powered by fear and the promise of social approval. The only sound was the soft scratch of her pen as she slid a citation across the table toward me. $200. And beneath the fine print, a threat. Failure to comply would result in a lien placed against my property. The phrase burned into my mind, each letter dripping venom. A lien. For parking my own car in my own driveway. That night, I sat in my kitchen with the HOA covenants spread out like battle maps, reading every line under the dim glow of a single lamp. Hours passed as I flipped through legal jargon, my coffee growing cold, my jaw clenched so tight it ached. And then I saw it. Nothing in those documents prohibited sports cars. No mention of vehicle colors. No restrictions on factory specifications. Eleanor was inventing rules out of thin air and enforcing them like divine law. Armed with that knowledge, I walked into the next meeting ready to expose her. My voice was calm, my tone measured, as I laid out every discrepancy, highlighting the sections that contradicted her citations. For a moment, I thought I saw doubt flicker in one of the board members' eyes, but it vanished the second Eleanor spoke. She leaned back in her chair, folding her hands like a queen entertaining a complaint from a peasant. "Some people," she said softly, her words sweet enough to rot teeth, "do not understand that rules exist for a reason. Perhaps you would be happier in a different type of neighborhood." Her gaze locked on mine. And in that moment, the message was clear. Leave, or be crushed. The undertone was thick with something more than arrogance. It was a warning, laced with a racial edge so sharp I could feel it slicing through the air. And when the board voted 4-1 to uphold every citation she had issued, I understood the truth. This was not about aesthetics. It was about control. It was about reminding the new guy where he stood. Eleanor Maddox had declared war, and she had no idea I was about to fight back harder than anyone ever had. 1 week later, I walked out of my house and froze. The morning sun should have been warm on my skin, the air sweet with honeysuckle from the neighbor's fence, but all I felt was a cold wave of disbelief crashing over me. My Camaro sat in the driveway, mutilated. Deep, jagged scratches carved across its vibrant red body like scars from a blade. The lines ran deliberately from headlight to tail light, cutting through paint and pride down to bare metal. The passenger side window was a spiderweb of cracks, glittering under the sun like shards of broken dreams. I could taste copper in my mouth, a phantom tang of blood that came from pure rage boiling in my veins. Whoever had done this wanted me broken. They wanted me humiliated, and I knew exactly whose manicured hands were behind it. I called the police, clinging to the thin hope that someone would care. Officer Daniels showed up 20 minutes later. His expression, the same one you see on people waiting for their coffee order. He scribbled notes on a pad like he was documenting a lost umbrella, not the destruction of property worth thousands of dollars. "Probably kids," he muttered without looking at me, even as the deliberate pattern of the scratches screamed otherwise. "No witnesses, no cameras, nothing we can do." That was his verdict, delivered with all the enthusiasm of a man reading the weather report. The repair estimate came later that afternoon. $2,800. My insurance deductible would not even make a dent. I stood in my garage staring at that number, my fists clenched so hard my nails bit into my palms, and felt something inside me shift. The part of me that wanted peace, that believed in quiet coexistence, died right there under the harsh fluorescent lights. What rose in its place was colder, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. Eleanor had drawn first blood, but she had made a fatal miscalculation. She thought I was just another ordinary neighbor she could bully into submission. What she did not know was that I was a man with nothing left to lose and a lifetime of experience solving problems that looked impossible on paper. And Eleanor Maddox was about to become the biggest problem of my life. That same evening, as I finished a job installing security lights for a homeowner across town, my phone buzzed with a message that changed everything. It was from Martha Pierce, the 73-year-old widow who lived 2 houses down. Her text was short but loaded. "Can you come over? Need to tell you something important." Martha had always been kind, one of the few people in this neighborhood who greeted me with genuine warmth instead of cautious smiles. Her house smelled faintly of lavender and something older, something secret, as she ushered me inside and pulled the curtains closed. Her hands trembled as she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, like Eleanor could hear us through the walls. "I saw who did it," she said, her eyes darting toward the window. "It was around midnight. Eleanor's boy, Trevor. 17 years old, creeping around your driveway with something metal in his hand, looking over his shoulder like a thief." My pulse roared in my ears. I asked if she would testify, and her face crumpled like wet paper. "I cannot, Marcus. She will destroy me." She destroyed Peterson last month for asking questions about landscaping bills. Fined her into selling her house. I cannot go through that. Her fear was raw and contagious, but it did not infect me. It fueled me, because now I understood what I was dealing with. This was not just personal. This was a system. Eleanor had perfected a machine built to crush dissenters and feed her greed, and I had no intention of becoming her next casualty. Unlike Martha, unlike the Petersons, unlike the countless others who had been forced out, I was not running anywhere. While Eleanor thought she had scared me into silence, I was already planning the counterstrike that would bring her entire kingdom crashing down. The night Martha confessed what she saw, the final remnants of restraint in me burned away. I thanked her, reassured her she had done the right thing, and walked back into the shadows with my mind on fire. I knew 2 things then. 1, this war had moved beyond neighborhood politics. 2, Eleanor Maddox had just crossed into a battlefield she could never escape from. Her arrogance would not allow her to imagine it, but I had already started mapping the moves that would end her reign for good. I spent that weekend in hardware stores and electronics aisles, moving with cold precision. I bought equipment that could rival small-scale surveillance setups, motion-activated sensors, wide-angle systems with night vision, cloud storage backups that could not be erased by pulling a plug. I wired the angles with the same meticulous care I brought to commercial electrical work. The satisfying click of each mounting bracket echoed in my garage like the sound of a trigger being cocked. This was no longer about repairing damage. This was about fortifying every inch of ground I owned and setting a trap so perfect it would hold even the slipperiest serpent. By Sunday night, my property was under a net of vigilance, so tight not even a shadow could move without me knowing. From that point forward, I stopped hoping for justice from authorities who yawned through their paperwork and started planning to gather evidence strong enough to make Eleanor choke on her own smugness. Every wire I laid and every lens I calibrated was a promise that the next time she or anyone in her orbit touched my car, their fingerprints would stain more than steel, they would stain their entire future. What I did not know, as I tightened the last screw and wiped the sweat from my forehead, was that my plan would pay off faster and more explosively than even I imagined. 3 nights later, at 2:17 in the morning, the silence cracked open like a rotten egg. The sensors picked up movement, and what unfolded was not Trevor's nervous skulking. It was Eleanor herself. The woman who preached rules and moral superiority like gospel was crouched beside my car in the darkness, her pristine workout gear hugging a body hunched in criminal intent. Her diamond wedding ring glinted under the dim streetlight as she gripped a landscaping edger community property, no less dragging it with slow, methodical strokes across my rear quarter panel. It was not just vandalism, it was a ritual, an act of dominance. Her lips curled in a smile so sharp it could cut glass as she leaned in to carve deeper, the muscles in her arms tightening with every gouge. She was not satisfied with surface scratches. She wanted to peel away the skin of that car like stripping the last layer of pride from my bones. And as she worked, her composure cracked in the most telling way. She enjoyed it. This was pleasure disguised as punishment, the thrill of a tyrant reminding her victim who held the power. I lay still, every instinct screaming to tear outside and rip that edger from her manicured hands, to drag her down into the cold concrete and make her feel what thousands of dollars of damage felt like in her own veins. But another voice, colder and wiser, whispered in the back of my mind, "Let her finish. Let her dig her grave with every stroke. Rage was a weapon, but timing was the trigger, and this was not the moment to fire. I let her go. I let her strut back into her house, under the illusion that she had won. And while she slept behind her locked doors, I was awake, cataloguing her crime with a clarity that turned my anger into something sharper than steel. The next day, her arrogance escalated from the shadows to the paper trail. A certified letter arrived by late afternoon, sealed with the bureaucratic smugness only an HOA can produce. Emergency violation notice. It read in bold type. Unauthorized modifications to your vehicle have been detected. Your aftermarket exhaust system violates Section 4.7b of the Community Standards. Vehicle must be restored to factory condition or removed from the property within 48 hours. Failure to comply will result in immediate towing at the owner's expense, plus administrative fees. I stared at those words until they blurred, the taste of bile rising in my throat. She was not satisfied with vandalizing my car. She was now weaponizing the system to steal it from me legally. Her audacity was breathtaking, but as I traced the elegant loops of her signature at the bottom of that notice, I felt something unexpected. Gratitude, because only someone blinded by hubris would go this far, and in doing so, she had handed me the rope to hang her entire empire. That evening, the next piece of the puzzle arrived in the form of a nervous knock at my door. Martha again, her frail frame tense with urgency. "There is someone you need to meet," she whispered, her eyes darting like she expected Eleanor's shadow to slide under the door. "Edgar Price is back in town." The name flickered in my memory, a former treasurer forced out under mysterious circumstances. We met him in a coffee shop 30 minutes away, the kind of place where the lights hum and the tables are sticky with secrets. Edgar looked like a man hollowed out by years of carrying truths too heavy to bear. His hands shook as he opened a manila folder so thick it could have brained an ox. "She is not just power drunk," he said, his voice brittle as paper. "She is a thief, a big one." What spilled across that table turned my blood to ice. Bank records showing systematic transfers, invoices billed to contractors who never set foot in Willow Park, payments funneled into accounts tied to companies that existed only on paper. The name on one of those registrations made my jaw tighten until my teeth ached. Willow Park Maintenance Solutions, filed under her maiden name, with her home address as the headquarters. Every month, anywhere from $500 to $2,000 bled out of community funds into this phantom entity. Add it up over 3 years, and you had more than theft. You had a heist disguised as governance. Edgar's voice dropped lower, thick with old fear and new rage. I tried to stop her, filed police reports, contacted the Attorney General, even went to local news. Do you know what happened? Suddenly my roof needed $30,000 in emergency repairs, according to her inspectors. My insurance got cancelled after anonymous safety complaints. They crushed me until I sold my house for pennies and disappeared. His hands hovered over the documents like he feared they might ignite from the weight of their own damning truth. I have kept copies of everything, waiting for someone who could finish what I started. That night, I drove home with the folder on my passenger seat like a box of live ammunition, and as the streetlights blurred past, a single thought burned in my brain. Eleanor Maddox believed she had built a kingdom too fortified to fall. She had no idea the walls were already cracking, and I was holding the wrecking ball. The plan shifted that night from personal vengeance to total annihilation. This was no longer about scratches on paint or fines for hoses left on lawns. This was racketeering hiding under hydrangeas, embezzlement dressed in garden club charm. She had weaponized every tool in her reach: insurance fraud, city code enforcement, even towing companies to bleed residents dry and purge anyone who questioned her authority. But the beauty of building an empire on lies is that one truth, in the right hands, can topple it like a house of cards. I spread the evidence across my kitchen table under the cold glare of a single bulb. Bank statements curled at the edges like brittle leaves. Fake invoices smirked at me in bold type. Each page whispered the same promise: when the hammer falls, it will not just break her crown, it will shatter every illusion she has ever wrapped around herself. And as I sat there, listening to the silence stretch thin around me, I felt a stillness settle deep in my bones, a calm so absolute it almost frightened me. Because calm, in the middle of a storm, is not peace. It is precision sharpening itself for the kill. Eleanor Maddox had started a war she thought was about compliance and control. What she had ignited was a revolution, and when the sun rose on that quiet street, she would not just lose her car or her title. She would lose everything she had stolen, everything she had built, and the hollow echo of her power would be the only thing left to haunt her. Dawn broke over Willow Park with the kind of deceptive calm that hides storms behind blue skies. The neighborhood lay under a soft veil of autumn light, the air crisp and clean, the kind of morning that should have smelled like promise. But for Eleanor Maddox, this was the day her empire cracked. She just did not know it yet. While the first threads of sunlight crawled across manicured lawns, my garage pulsed with quiet energy. The night before had been a blur of movement papers, spread like war plans across metal workbenches, affidavits stacked in neat rows, evidence pinned with surgical precision. Edgar had arrived with his briefcase of secrets, his hands trembling but his voice finally steady, ready to see justice after years of running from the shadow of her power. Martha stood beside him, clutching a thermos of coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Her fear burned away and replaced with something brighter resolve. And then there was Rico, the final piece in the machine we had built, carrying not just his invoices but his fury. His tow truck sat outside like a coiled predator, gleaming under streetlights, its engine ticking softly in the cool night air, waiting for the moment to strike. Rico was the key to turning humiliation into spectacle. For months, Eleanor had been authorizing tows through his company, flexing her power by yanking cars off driveways to remind everyone who ruled Willow Park. But what she did not know, what she never imagined, was that Rico had been keeping meticulous records, and every one of those signatures on unpaid invoices bore her name. $3,800 in debt, stretched over 18 months. And worse, while the HOA bank statements showed checks going out like clockwork to Crawford Towing Solutions, Rico had never seen a cent. The name on those fraudulent deposits? Rebecca Morrison, Eleanor's sister, tied to a post office box in a neighboring county. The pattern was as elegant as it was incriminating. A fake company laundering community funds under the guise of towing expenses, siphoning off money month after month while stiffing the legitimate contractor doing the actual work. When Rico spread those papers across my garage table, I felt something inside me lock into place. This was no longer a personal grudge. This was a federal crime spree, disguised as HOA management, and we were about to pull the mask off in front of the entire neighborhood. Sarah Kim arrived just after dawn, stepping out of her car like a blade sliding free of its sheath. She was the kind of attorney who carried storms in her briefcase, and the first words out of her mouth made my pulse surge with a satisfaction so sharp it almost hurt. "This is not civil litigation," she said, flipping through Edgar's folders with the precision of a surgeon. "This is wire fraud. This is mail fraud. This is racketeering. When this hits, it will not just take down your HOA, it will make headlines." She laid out the strategy like a general mapping. A siege. Every document duplicated and stored in 3 states. Every witness sworn and ready. The district attorney already briefed through channels Sarah had cultivated for years. And the timing? Perfect. Because at 8:15 sharp, Eleanor would begin her daily patrol, strutting through the neighborhood like a monarch surveying her kingdom. She would expect to find my Camaro gone, my spirit broken. Instead, she would find Rico's tow truck idling like a steel beast at the curb, her unpaid sins stacked in folders, her carefully guarded secrets unraveling in the morning sun. By 6:30, the street hummed with a tension that no one could name yet. Curtains fluttered as neighbors peeked out, drawn by the unusual presence of Rico's massive rig gleaming in front of my house. The diesel engine grumbled low, a sound that felt like a growl in the bones of the earth. Martha moved between houses like a messenger in an underground resistance, alerting the families Eleanor had bled dry for years. One by one, doors opened. People stepped out, hesitant at first, then bolder as they spotted familiar faces gathering on my driveway. Edgar stood beside me, his briefcase clutched in white-knuckled hands, the lines of fear etched into his face, smoothed away by something harder. Vindication. Rico leaned against his truck with the easy posture of a man who knew he was about to deliver justice with a hook and chain. And then, right on schedule, the Queen emerged. Eleanor swept out of her front door in a tailored suit that screamed desperation disguised as authority. Her heels clicked sharp against the driveway, her phone clutched in a grip that looked almost violent. She moved with the confidence of someone who still believed she could talk her way out of hell, unaware that the gates had already slammed shut behind her. The moment her eyes landed on Rico's tow truck, something in her face flickered panic, flashing like a signal behind the icy veneer. She masked it quickly, straightening her spine and lifting her chin, as if posture could erase the stench of fear. "You need to move this vehicle immediately," she commanded, her voice slicing through the cool morning air. "This is private property, and you are trespassing." Rico's smile was slow and dangerous, the kind that promised nothing but trouble for the person standing across from it. "Ma'am, I am parked on a public street, and I am here to collect payment for services rendered 18 months' worth of unpaid invoices authorized by you, totaling $3,800. For a heartbeat, silence hung heavy, the kind that feels like the world holding its breath. Then Eleanor laughed, a brittle, sharp-edged sound that broke too quickly to be real. "That is absurd," she snapped, waving a dismissive hand. "Our treasurer handles all payments. If you have an issue, take it up with the board. Now leave before I call the police." Rico did not move. Instead, he reached into the cab of his truck and pulled out a folder so thick it could have been a brick. "Already did," he said, flipping it open to reveal pages stamped with her name, her signature looping like a snake across every authorization line. "And while we are on the subject, maybe you can explain why your HOA's bank records show payments to Crawford Towing Solutions instead of me. Funny thing about that company, it is registered to your sister." The color drained from Eleanor's face so fast it was like watching paint stripped from a wall. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Not yet, because that was the moment when blue and red lights washed over the street. Officer Daniels stepped out of his cruiser, his expression tighter than yesterday's board detachment. Behind him rolled two unmarked sedans, their presence radiating the kind of authority that made the air feel heavier. Federal authority. Eleanor spun toward them like a drowning woman lunging for a lifeboat. "Thank heavens," she cried, her voice pitching high with faux relief. "Officer, I need you to remove these people immediately. They are harassing me, threatening me." "Save it," Daniels cut in, his tone flat as a blade. "We have some questions about financial misconduct, and some folks who would like a word with you." Behind him, men in dark suits opened car doors with the quiet efficiency of wolves circling prey. The murmurs in the crowd swelled into something electric as neighbors edged closer, phones lifted high, their fear melting into awe. Years of whispers, years of fines and threats and humiliation, all of it condensed into this single moment when the untouchable queen stood on the edge of a cliff with no ground left beneath her feet. What happened next was a symphony of collapse. The board members, she had once ruled with an iron manicure, arrived in a flurry of panic, summoned by her frantic calls. They took one look at the mountain of evidence spread across Rico's hood: bank statements, fraudulent contracts, insurance reports, dripping with lies, and turned on her faster than starving dogs on a carcass. "I had no idea," one stammered, loud enough for every recording phone to catch. "She handled all the finances." Another shook his head, sweating through his collar. "We trusted her." Loyalty evaporated like morning mist, as each of them scrambled to save themselves from the sinking ship. And Eleanor? She clawed for control, with the desperation of a monarch watching the guillotine being wheeled down the street. She threatened lawsuits. She invoked city officials by name. She even tried to call in political favors, her voice shrill with the sound of doors slamming in her imagination. Nothing worked. Not when federal agents closed in. Not when the reporter from Channel 8 stepped out of a news van with a camera crew and a folder of her own, thick with every piece of dirt we had delivered the night before. "Mrs. Maddox," the reporter called, her voice slicing through the chaos like a trumpet before battle. "Would you like to comment on allegations that you embezzled $75,000 from your community while terrorizing residents who questioned your authority?" That was the death blow. Eleanor's face collapsed in on itself, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gulping for air. Words failed her because the lies she had mastered for years could not scale the walls of truth closing in on all sides. And then the click came, the metallic whisper of handcuffs sliding shut around wrists that had signed every fraudulent check. The sound rolled through the crowd like thunder before a cleansing rain. Cheers erupted, raw and jubilant, bouncing off the neat facades of houses that had once cowered under her shadow. Children laughed from school bus windows. Parents lifted their phones higher, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked like it knew the world had just tilted back toward justice. Eleanor Maddox, queen of manicured tyranny, was led down her perfect driveway in chains, her designer heels sinking into cracks she had never noticed before. And as the agents guided her toward the waiting sedan, Rico swung his truck into motion, the steel hook rising like the arm of a god delivering judgment. It latched onto her Mercedes, the white idol she had worshipped with wax and polish, and yanked it off the ground with a groan of surrender. Eleanor turned just in time to see her empire's last shining symbol dangling in the morning sun like a carcass on a butcher's hook. The sound that tore from her throat was not human. It was the wail of a kingdom burning. By the time the sun climbed high over Willow Park, the street had transformed into something unrecognizable. Not the sterile corridor of fear it had been, but a living, breathing artery, pulsing with freedom. Neighbors stood shoulder to shoulder, their laughter ringing like bells after a funeral. Martha's tears shone in the light, carving bright tracks down cheeks that had carried too many years of silence. Edgar clutched my arm with a grip that shook, his voice cracking as he whispered, "It is over. It is finally over." But it was not just over. It was the beginning of something new. 6 months later, the lawns still gleamed, and the mailboxes still stood in their neat little rows, but the air carried a different weight. A lightness. A promise. Children played in driveways without mothers, yanking them inside for fear of a citation. Neighbors lingered over fences, trading stories instead of whispered warnings. The new HOA board met under open skies, streaming their meetings live, their books spread wide for all to see. Edgar became treasurer by unanimous vote. Martha planted flowers that spilled in riotous color across her yard, daring anyone to stop her. And me, I sat in my driveway one golden evening, watching the sun ignite the fresh paint on my fully restored Camaro, listening to the sound of laughter roll down the street like music. The car gleamed brighter than the day I bought it, but it was more than metal now. It was proof. Proof that tyrants fall. Proof that when good people stop bowing, even the sharpest crowns shatter. And as my phone buzzed with another call from another neighborhood, begging for help, I smiled and said yes, because some wars do not end. They ripple, and sometimes, when you win one, you light a signal fire bright enough for the whole world to see.